News on Sunday is a socialist publication.
News on Sunday believes that everybody has the right to the basic necessities.
News on Sunday will support the right to self-determination of all peoples.
News on Sunday
recognises that Britain is a society based on the unequal ownership of wealth, prosperity and power.
News on Sunday will be internationalist in outlook.
News on Sunday... I'm sorry, I just can't take this seriously, I'm very sorry.
News on Sunday believes that the root cause of the present troubles in Ireland is the British presence in that country.
News on Sunday will support workers and their trade unions when they take industrial action.
News on Sunday opposes the imposition of suffering on animals. I'm sorry.
By the mid-80s, the left in Britain was on its knees.
Can we keep close together, please? 5 or 6 wide.
Thatcher was riding high, having swept to power for a second term. The miners had been defeated after a year-long strike. Large parts of the state sector were being put in private hands, and unemployment had reached 3 million. Faced with the tabloid press as right-wing as the government, committed left-wingers began to wonder whether they could rally support for their cause if only they could publish their own newspaper.
At the time, you're talking about a newspaper environment where Mrs. Thatcher was queen, and there were very, very few newspapers or media attacking her outright, and even that which might have, the Daily Mirror at the time, was run by Robert Maxwell. So I do feel the left didn't feel it had anywhere to go in the media.
We needed a paper that would tell the truth. It might be seen as our truth, what do you mean by truth? But it was going to be the truth. At least there was going to be another side of the argument put.
There were significant kind of people on the left, councils, trade unions, etc., who felt that Thatcherism had been, an enormous period of defeat for the left. And it would be good to have something that was pushing over left-wing ideas, campaigning against kind of growing poverty, against homelessness, against unemployment. People felt that that would be, good for the left and might help, give the left some renewed confidence.
OK, ready. Let's do it.
The left-wing tabloid that would eventually emerge from these debates was News on Sunday. It launched in April 1987 and went bankrupt just 2 months later. It was one of the boldest and most expensive business ventures ever attempted by the far left in Britain. And it was a disaster. Alan Hayling was the man behind it. Hayling had left Cambridge University with a double first and was a member of a small left-wing faction called Big Flame.
Big Flame was a Marxist organisation, and hence it saw working class struggle, working class action, working class consciousness as being key to getting rid of inequality in society. And so it had quite a big focus on working alongside, working with working class organisations.
In 1976, after a brief stint on the BBC's graduate trainee scheme, Hayling got a job as a production worker on the Ford assembly line.
Those of us in Big Flame had quite a rank and file perspective in everything that we did. So I ended up working for what I thought was going to be 3, 4, 5 months in Slough at the Langley truck plant.
Well, there weren't any things like Big Flame Directive, you shall go and work on the shop floor. There's nothing like that. There were people who did those kind of things to remove themselves from the ivory tower of wherever they were and get a sense of what it was like on the front line and to do what they could there.
Alan never ever let on that he'd had a particular degree. He'd never... It didn't seem important.
As it turned out, Hayling stayed on the assembly line for 8 years. While he was there, he mobilised Ford workers in their struggles with management and even sang backing vocals on this strikers' song.
And it's 1, 2, 3, what are we fighting for? You can stop your 5%, 'cause that won't pay the rent. And it's 5, 6, 7, picketing the factory gates. It's 1 in the eye for Sonny Jim. Whoopee, we're gonna win.
While Hayling was living the political life at Ford, Keith Sutton, who had a working-class background and had left school at 16, was working on Fleet Street. He was dreaming of a life of political activism.
After it was about 10 years of Fleet Street, I took a year out, and I guess, if you like, that was the beginning of a more political awakening in me.
His background, I mean, he'd been a traditional young go-getting reporter who'd done very well, got into Fleet Street, but had eventually decided that he didn't like what he was doing and had opted out. So he had a very radical streak to him.
I was involved in direct action community politics, would be the best way to describe it. I was involved in the campaign to restore cheap fares to the buses, so we hijacked a bus in the name of democracy. Another event that I recall was taking over Centre Point in the name of the homeless.
In the early 80s, Hayling gathered around him a group of like-minded left-wingers, including former Maoist and fellow Big Flamer Henry Stewart and revolutionary socialist John Hoyland. Drawing on their analysis of class consciousness, they decided to try and develop a mass-market left-wing newspaper.
It was to be a tabloid. It was going to be, you know, the first tabloid-size, fairly serious newspaper.
As far as its politics was going to be concerned, it was not going to represent any particular left-wing sect or party or anything like that. It was going to be oppositional, it was going to be campaigning, but it was also going to be have ideas in it.
It was about actually having a radical newspaper that would expose things in society, that would make a difference, that would be a rallying call for people. It was a very exciting idea. Instead of going on one more demo or doing some more leaflets, actually looking at where opinion is formed and playing a central part there.
This initial group of socialists, libertarians and revolutionaries now sat down and spelt out their programme of left-wing beliefs. The document they wrote became a set of rules that was to be the newspaper's editorial charter.
News on Sunday believes that everybody has the right to the basic necessities, such as housing, education and healthcare,
in the form of public services and a minimum income sufficient to maintain a decent standard of living.
News on Sunday recognises the dangers of damaging the ecological balance of the world. The paper will advocate the conservation of natural resources, habitats and species, and will support appropriate campaigns and movements.
With grants from the GLC and the Greater London Enterprise Board, Hayling and his friends put together a dummy newspaper to illustrate their left-wing vision. The dummy was market researched, and the thrilling news came back that the paper could expect to sell over 1 million copies a week. But before they went in search of investors, Hayling realised they needed a proper journalistic figurehead on board. In an audacious move, he decided to get in touch with the best-known campaigning left-wing journalist he could think of.
In the late 1950s, I was a young journalist working as a shipping reporter on the Sydney Daily Telegraph. This meant that I was a witness to an extraordinary migration of human beings from one end of the earth to the other. It's an epic story not often told, its heroes often unsung.
You know, I enjoyed watching his television programmes. I thought it was great. I'd never met him. And I phoned him up.
I was to be the main journalist ingredient in the whole enterprise.
Doing their best to seem credible, the fledgling News on Sunday team now headed for the city to raise the £6.5 million they would need to launch the paper.
We all wore suits and ties and looked as smart as we possibly could for that operation.
Had you worn suits before?
I don't think I'd ever worn a suit in my working life up to that point.
We kind of dressed the part, or we tried to dress the part, with enormous difficulty in my case, but we managed. And we had a good case to make.
The people who weren't giving money was anyone in the city. But they weren't interested at all. The people that were interested, that took it up with the local authorities, the trade unions, individuals, the cooperative movement, these kinds of people.
Nearly £4 million came from local authority pension funds and over £1.5 million from trade unions. The Transport and General Workers Union was the biggest single investor and gambled over £500,000.
We needed to raise 6.5 million. We actually raised, I think it was 6.2. So we're at the last day frantically, I was ringing round. We had this list of individuals I was ringing round trying to get money to people who were so close.
More people come to Oystons to sell their home than to any other estate agent in the north.
Amongst those that put up the remaining money was Owen Oyston, a former actor who'd made his millions out of selling property in the northwest.
£100,000. It could be you!
With Oyston's money in the bag, News on Sunday had the capital to go ahead. They were now in business.
Come on. Inside, minutes later, the celebrations. John Pelger, favourite for the editor-in-chief's chair, was justifiably euphoric.
How do you feel? Very good. Beginning of the first radical newspaper in this country for 30 years.
Somebody's got to make a speech about now that all...
So this evening, the left in Fleet Street had, for once, something to be thankful for. The News on Sunday should publish on the first Sunday in April, assuming, they say, that's not April Fool's Day.
It's the News on Sunday.
One of the great beliefs on the left was that a radical venture could never get the money together. Well, we were an idea for a radical campaigning newspaper, and we raised £6.5 million. We shattered that myth. I mean, that was an incredible achievement.
Clearly, we weren't people trapped in a particular left-wing bubble who weren't able to think in different ways. We were people who were very entrepreneurial.
The News on Sunday was the extreme left's first attempt to enter mainstream public life. This was uncharted territory. The left-wingers in charge realised they would need to safeguard their socialist dream and make sure it would never fall prey to right-wing capitalists.
It was going to be important to protect the editorial direction of the newspaper, and in particular to prevent the editor being sacked.
In an unprecedented move, they handed a controlling interest over to a collective made up of the paper's target audience, the proletariat. Hayling first approached a former comrade from Ford. John Bohanna was a trade unionist there and was an activist in the Socialist Workers' Party.
Alan began to tell me that I would be something to do with protecting the paper, and I said, smashing. A Sunday socialist worker, OK, you could temper down its politics if they wanted to a little bit and put a crossword in. But why not have that?
bumped into John Boanna.